Hello. If you can hear me. Can you hear me? Beautiful. We're going over live, that's why.
and we will see, because I will hear myself on stream with the delay. Hopefully everything works out. Thank you everyone for joining. Again, if you hear the audio being not working so well, my bad. Still working out through some of the kinks, so please let me know. So, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of A Healer's Journey. So before we start, I just have to go over a few things. So the information presented in this discussion is going to be of a general nature and is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. While many of the people here have some form or various forms of mental health training, they are not your mental health professional. This discussion is not a replacement for mental or physical care or for the diagnosis of any mental health illness or condition. So, hello, and thank you again for joining us on A Healer's Journey, a new show within the Guardians MH podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Goku, and with me tonight is my co host, Matt. How are you doing, Matt?
Hey, everybody. How's everything going?
If you're joining us for the first time, Guardians MH is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on promoting mental health awareness throughout the gaming community. We strive to be a first step in assisting individuals with gathering meaningful resources in a safe and inclusive atmosphere. A healer's journey is just another way that we want to normalize talking about mental health with other mental health professionals discussing their journey into becoming a mental health professional and their unique abilities to help clients throughout their most challenging times. So join us tonight and please welcoming Dr. Janina Scarlett. Hi, Janina.
Hello,
How are you doing
hello.
tonight?
I'm doing okay, thanks. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's always a treat to have you on.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank
I
you.
think
Thank
this
you.
is the third time you've been on one of our various shows.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Thank you.
So, for the people that may not know who you are or that may not know your story, could you please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I am an author and a full-time geek, and I specialize in incorporating pop culture into evidence-based therapy to help folks manage post-traumatic stress disorder, because I believe that it is through stories that we find out who we really are and start the path of our healing.
Oh, I did your training
Absolutely.
a few years ago, and I've been using it for years now.
Thank
And it's
you.
just a valuable tool to have.
Thank you so much.
And I've been seeing geek therapy and the use of geek culture more
Yeah.
and more online. And I've been doing more and more trainings and just kind of basking into this wealth of knowledge. And it's just incredible.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm really glad to see more and more providers worldwide offering these kind of skills.
Because for me, I think I'm the only one that I know of in my surrounding area that does this type of work. Because
And so,
so much of the providers that I know of are still like fully focused on like the manual of like CBT or ACT or DBT, those more rigid manuals.
all of which are very important, right? These are
Mhm.
the gold standards of treatment. These are, our most up-to-date evidence-based therapies. And I think that, as for me anyway, I think as providers, we need to be flexible in terms of meeting our clients where they're at. And so I am an ACT provider, meaning I use acceptance and commitment therapy, and I use superhero therapy as sort of a tool that can be incorporated into this evidence-based therapy, so that my clients feel heard and seen.
And it's, to me at least, in regards to like utilizing pop culture, superheroes, any cinematic universe, I think too, right? I, Doc, you said it before, like you're kind of the only one that maybe does that or that you're aware of.
Mhm.
I can speak for like a little bit of where I am. It's not necessarily widely accepted, right? There is still that aspect of like a taboo to it. Like, oh, why are you talking about comic books in your session? And it's like, because I'm meeting the person where they're at and that's something that they enjoy and identify with, and it's telling. It can tell a lot. So I think it's 100% important and valuable and needed, and something that I think needs to go in the hands of tons of clinicians, especially as the practice grows and as we kind of grow into this now new trend, because it's popular now. The cool kids
Yeah.
watch
The
all
cool
of
kids
this.
watch Marvel. And for
Right.
those who
Whereas
have yet to see Doctor Strange, it's a fantastic movie. I won't spoil it, but it was great.
And the thing is that we're not talking about comic books.
Mm,
We're talking about stories,
mm,
right?
right.
And storytelling has been around for thousands of years, for as long as there has been spoken word. And,
Mhm.
you know, I look at what I do anyway as nothing new, right? It's a tool that has existed for so long, repackaged, if you will. But essentially, we're talking about the tradition that has existed for thousands of years that has helped people to understand trauma, understand morals, understand how to act and not to act
mm.
in certain situations. And so I guess sometimes I'm a little bit baffled when people say that there's not a lot of empirical support for this kind of a tool. But the truth is, we're essentially talking about storytelling in whatever medium, whether we're talking about comic books, movies, TV shows, or legends, myths, right? All of it is storytelling. And for many of our clients, it is the story of their life that they're trying to process and understand.
Because it makes me think to when I started my undergrad thesis, and which later became my doctoral thesis, I went up to my clinical supervisor there, and he was kind of the only one that wanted to do things that were a little bit out of the box. And I brought up this idea of parasocial relationships and how they impact pro-social behaviors. He had never heard of it. And I pitched the idea to him where a lot of people, because we have a really religious community down here, so a lot of people go, well, what would Jesus do? And I
Mhm.
pitched him, well, what would Spider-Man do? And that kind of lit that light bulb where this could be something.
And Dr. Goku, is your research published?
No, it's not. I could work on publishing it, but I just have no time.
If and when you do, please send it my way. I would love to refer to your research in my presentations and just in general to refer people to your work.
Might have to take out the Google Translate because, again, I am maternally French, so
Yeah.
the whole thesis is written in French.
Yeah, but I think that a lot of magazine articles are available with an English translation. I think, a lot of libraries will do a translation. So if you publish in French, it should be available, I think, in
Okay.
English.
I'll add it to the list of things to do. So, what I wanted to ask you is we've heard your story many times, and again, I think it's important for a lot of people to hear this amazing story of yours. So, could you please tell us your journey
Sure.
about becoming a mental health professional?
And, I think telling it today is very different
Mm-hmm.
from the previous times I've ever shared the story. Um, I was born and raised in Ukraine, and this is the first year where I don't have to specify where that is. And like a lot of people in Ukraine, I was born into intergenerational trauma of the Second World War. I, walked on the streets where genocide happened. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing a memorial of some kind where it took place. And like all other Ukrainian citizens, I was exposed to Chernobyl radiation. I joke about waiting for my spidey senses, and all kind of magical abilities. But the truth is, like a lot of Ukrainian individuals, I spent a lot of my childhood in and out of hospitals, very, very ill and wondering if I would ever make it to adulthood. And when my family and I immigrated to the United States, I was in middle school. I was in seventh grade. So I was 12 years old. And I don't know about you guys, but no one at that point, I don't know if Canadian schools followed the same system, but seventh grade, right? Like being around 12 years old. I don't know if it's the same count, but
Mhm.
uh, no one in my middle school talked about mental health. And so I thought I was the only person who was going through depression and anxiety and trauma and having all these symptoms. I didn't have the words for them. I just knew that I felt bad. That was, what I knew. And I thought that there was something off about me. I thought that there was something broken about me. And I thought I was different from everyone else. And when I was in high school, I was working in a movie theater. So first job, right? First summer job working in a movie theater. And it was year 2000. And that's the year that the first X-Men movie came out. And so I was invited to go see it along with the rest of the staff. And the second the movie opened, I was in tears because it felt like I was watching my own history on the screen, from Magneto's history in World War II to seeing the X-Men being discriminated against for being different to seeing the trauma. But what struck me more than anything was this pervasive loneliness that each and every one of them experienced, but no one talked about, right? So it took them coming together, thanks to Professor Xavier, to realize that together as a unit, they were stronger, they were resilient, they were able to help each other recover from trauma, but also help other people. And so it was because of this movie that I realized that most of us don't talk about mental health. Most of us don't understand mental health, and that perhaps loneliness is the most universal emotion of them all. And I realized that we can tell the truth through fictional stories. So it's because of seeing this movie that I signed up for my first ever psychology class in high school. And this is what I do now.
And that's just an amazing story to go from being this immigrant and seeing this. Well, with X-Men, it's a bunch of people that feel like they're outcasts. And one, being Canadian and being born here, I've never had to feel this, but a lot of the clients that I have worked with are immigrants, and they have this feeling of, where do I fit in and how do I integrate, and I feel different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the thing is, we don't have to be an immigrant to feel like we don't fit in,
Mhm.
right? I think most of us secretly feel like we don't quite fit in or don't quite belong into our group. And we're biologically wired to think and feel this way because we're wired for connection and belonging.
Mhm.
Connection is as important to our survivorship as food, water, and sleep. And that's why loneliness feels like we're dying, right? It's our body prompting us to seek connection. And that's why we're always wondering, do I fit in? Do I belong? Because in the past, right, hundreds of years ago, if you weren't a part of the group, you didn't eat and you were eaten. Nowadays, although we can physically survive, our bodies start to break down when we feel lonely, right? Our body doesn't produce enough oxytocin, enough opiates, and we start to feel emotional and physical pain. And so when we watch heroes on the screen or characters on the screen bonding together, we can vicariously feel that bond and feel less lonely. And it actually can create physiological and psychological benefits for us to experience a sense of belonging, either IRL in real life or vicariously through parasocial relationships.
Yeah, those parasocial relationships are so strong that
Mhm.
people feel as though this character is a friend, or feels
Yes.
as though they're real. I remember
Yes.
um, I wish I would have known about this study when I was doing my thesis, but the Friends study,
Mhm.
after Friends went off air, and how many people were going through real grief.
Yeah, heartbreak, absolutely, because the characters became other people's friends. And people still watch reruns of the show because they're looking for that. Hi, me too. Because they're looking for that sense of connection.
So using this power of a story, how did you take this through undergrad and grad school?
Well, in undergrad and grad school, I was sort of figuring out what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to study, but I knew I was really interested in the brain. And so in, my past life, I sort of became a neuroscientist and studied the brain for a while and how it works and how it's functioning. But I realized that I was missing this clinical part that I wanted to get back into stories and people's stories and not just analyze brain cells and seeing how they work, but seeing it in action.
The
And so
human connection.
the human connection. And so I switched careers and went into clinical psychology. And from there on, I was focused really on stories. And when I was doing my postdoc, I was working with active duty service members who were trained for war, right? They would tell me when I'm in combat, I'm not afraid, right? I'm trained for this. But they would say that coming to therapy was scarier than combat because it was vulnerable, and that's not something they were trained for. And talking about Batman and Superman and The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, that gave a lot of the service members I was working with a vehicle, a tool, right? A language to process what happened to them and to understand.
Because one thing that we had mentioned is in school, in elementary school or middle school, not a lot is talked about emotion, emotion management, and emotion recognition. I talk to my clients all the time saying humans are born with emotions. We will innately have them. We don't know how to process them. We learn how to process and deal with them. But a lot of clients that I have never really learned what are emotions, how to process them, how to deal with them. So coming to therapy where this magical shrink wizard will talk about emotions is scary.
And wave my magic wand.
Magical shrink wizard. I like that.
Yes.
I should take out
I'm gonna
my psychologist t-shirt. It's a psychologist, a wizard, or a warlock that finds problems that you didn't know you had.
Yep. Putting it on my business card.
I was just about to say that. I think that's
Yeah.
going somewhere.
Yeah. No, for sure. And the thing is that most people erroneously think of emotions as a sign of weakness, right?
Mhm.
Like it's so interesting to me because, if you like Star Trek or I mean really any sci-fi, right? We look for some kind of robot-like characters. Like Data is my absolute favorite character of all time, or one of my favorite characters of all time. And he's so endearing because he's an android who's trying to understand how to be human, right? And I think like in watching any of the Star Wars movies or TV shows, like seeing R2D2 or BB-8, like what's really endearing is when they're emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for humans, very often we try to suppress and shut down the thing that makes humans human and try to make them into robots, and it doesn't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think that the expression of emotions, the expression of our feelings is there for a purpose, right? Like Jarvis suit, like Spidey senses, it's telling us what we need, and feelings are there to be felt. That's why they're called feelings. And feeling them, I think, is the most courageous thing of which human beings are capable.
And feelings and these emotions are what create these stronger bonds that we need for this human connection.
Absolutely, because emotions are an all or none deal, right? We can't try to suppress grief and hope for joy. It doesn't work that way. If we suppress grief, we suppress joy, and then we're stuck with numbness.
And I know, Matt, you might be able to talk about this a little bit more, but when people use substances where they're trying to suppress a lot of these emotions, whether it be through alcohol, drugs, or even using movies or video games or exercise, they're suppressing these emotions, but they're also just numbing.
Absolutely. And that numbness is actually a lot more painful, right?
Right.
The numbness can feel excruciating and very, very lonely, and sometimes can turn into panic attacks. When people say they have panic attacks that seem to come out of nowhere, a lot of times it's unprocessed grief and trauma that's showing up.
Right. That has been repressed and that has been sort of stuffed down through the use of whatever it might be, right? Because on the surface level, exercising is a great thing.
Mhm.
But if we're exercising 7 days a week for 5 hours a day, we're running away from something.
Absolutely. And anything, right? Whether we're talking
Hmm.
about, like, I'm a big fan of watching movies and TV shows and playing video games. That's all great. But the question I like to ask my clients is why, right? What's the purpose? And so I'll give you an example. I had a client come in who told me that he was struggling with depression. And he said, when I come home every night and my wife and kids go to bed, I just watch some TV shows and just try to numb out. And you'll probably tell me to stop watching them. And I said, no, I'm not going to tell you to stop watching them. I'm going to tell you to keep
Hmm.
watching them. But the only thing I'm going to ask you to change is why you're doing it. So at night, when your wife and kids are going to bed and you're going to watch your favorite show, I'm going to ask you to tell yourself, I'm going to watch this for a reason. I'm going to watch it to unwind right now because I love the show. The show is helping me, right? It's going to make me feel better. And so the idea is that if we're watching something for a purpose, it actually makes us feel better. If we're watching it because we don't want to feel, we feel worse. That's how procrastination works too. When people say, oh, I don't want to do my homework, I'm just going to watch the show because I don't want to do it, they feel worse. But if they say, I'm going to watch 2 episodes of this particular show so that I can charge up and then I'll be ready to work on my schoolwork, then they actually feel ready and more charged up.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the opposite side of that, I guess, in a sense, if we're continuing to run away, right, and there isn't this understanding of why, or there's this refusal, there's no motivation at the moment to sort of figure it out, we're actually reinforcing the aspect of doing the negative behavior because it's keeping things at bay, right? And I use quotations because that's sometimes what, especially in the realm of addiction, that's the words that are used, right? But unfortunately, what's creeping up now is the societal ramifications. It's the internal, interpersonal ramifications that are coming to light now. And this behavior just continues and continues and continues, and it gets negatively reinforced in the sense of negative behavior internally. We're trying to make it into, okay, but this is good because I'm not experiencing or living the trauma again, or the reason that I do this. And I think one of the things, to go back to a bit of storytelling, I love, and when I was practicing, I should say, TFCBT was something that I utilized a lot, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, for that aspect of it. Of course, if a client was ready, but that aspect of telling the story. And it was incredible to watch, be a part of, listen to these stories, and whatever medium they wanted to create it, whether it was through a comic book, whether it was through a song, whether it was through a legitimate story, and being able to share it with the trusted individual, the trusted member of their choosing, being able to share and open up. Um, it's sometimes magical, and I think the word sorcery and wizardry is actually appropriate for situations like that. um but it just goes to show the power, not only of storytelling, not only of the medium of specific pop culture and references and things like that, but also just that aspect of being able to tell your story and be okay with it, right?
But
The
what you
acceptance
mentioned,
factor of it.
what you mentioned there is, I think, is really important because these stories, with whatever modality that you use, are so important and integral to people because they've been avoiding these stories
Mhm.
for so long.
Hmm.
And after finishing school, I found is where I started to learn more about these types of approaches, where I don't feel that my uh, journey through grad school prepared me enough to really use story. So, how was your path through grad school and you wanting to use story? How was that kind of weaved in?
Yeah, great question. I think I was really fortunate. I had really supportive advisors. I mean, again, in my first program, like it was all neuroscience focused, so it wasn't really focused on like fictional stories, but the academic writing, my advisor would always say, tell a story, right? Like focus on telling a story. And I really appreciated that. And then when I switched gears and went into clinical, there was a lot of focus on stories, not necessarily fictional stories, but stories we tell ourselves. And when I was doing my postdoc work, I um like it finally all clicked, how fictional stories and people's trauma stories can merge together. And I was hired on a DoD, so Department of Defense grant. And so this was a government research study with service members. I had a protocol that was this thick that I had to follow very strict, in a very strict way. And nowhere in that protocol did it say, what do you say when a client says, I just wanted to be like Superman? And I sort of improvised and I went off script and I started doing Socratic questioning, but through superheroes and through pop culture. And I totally thought that I'm in trouble now, that I was going to get fired.
I had the
And
exact same feelings.
right, like that's it, right? I'm doing something wrong. And my supervisor, so everything was recorded, right? And so my supervisor listened to the tapes and she was like, I love what you do with that superhero stuff. Keep going. I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, no, it's great. And so I kept expecting these barriers and they didn't come. And then, so I'm, this like fresh, like postdoc, barely like any experience, right? So then the director of the mental health hospital at the military base calls me into his office a few months later. And I walk in, like terrified. And he's like, so I hear you're like bringing superheroes into therapy. And I was like, I'm fired. Right. And he's like, so you like superheroes? I was like, sure. And he was like, do you go to Comic-Con? I was like, yes. And he said, can you get me tickets? And it turned out that he was also really into superheroes. And he said, here's what we're going to do. Next week, next Thursday is grand rounds, right? All the like active duty and civilian providers are going to be there, and you're going to do a training on how to do this thing. And I was like, I'm a what now? And he was like, yeah, it's going to be great. So he's like, I'm going to send out a memo right now. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Imposter syndrome all the way.
Yeah, I lost count of how many panic attacks I had that day, but I did the training and it went really well. I stuttered. I totally like stuttered and stumbled. I don't know what I said. But the response was, again, better than I anticipated. And I think I've been really fortunate. And also, it's been really nice to see how open-minded so many clinicians are about this.
Because I think people undervalue how important stories are for everyone. I don't think I've met anyone that hasn't liked stories or haven't really linked with a character at some time in their life. People will say, oh, well, they're only fictional characters, but at some point in your life, you thought Batman was the coolest thing in the world. Saying the person that has like a Batman shelf behind him. But these characters speak to us on a fundamental level. They speak to us to things that we have, things that we want, but also teach us things that we don't want.
Well, I think they give us the vocabulary that we didn't have before, right? They give us a mirror of an emotion we didn't know we were experiencing. Like, I was 9 when I first realized that I was grieving. And my grandma passed away when I was 7, and I didn't know how to grieve, and I wasn't really allowed to, and I didn't allow myself to grieve. And then I was reading a Sherlock Holmes story, and this is one of the stories where he supposedly died. I apologize if this is a spoiler for anyone. And I was reading from Dr. Watson's perspective, this devastating grief that John Watson was going through, and I started sobbing because I could relate to that. I really resonated with that. And so I think for so many of us, we see a representation of ourself of an emotion or maybe a word that we might have learned that we didn't know about, or maybe an experience that we can now name or point to that we didn't realize we went through.
And I think this takes us to my next question is, for you, how has the profession changed you? Because you went from neuroscience to psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout your years, and I know for me, over the years, the job has changed me. It has made me see things differently.
Well, for sure. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I think it's allowed me, I think, to be true to myself, because I think when I was still figuring myself out as I was starting like in my clinical practicum, I would put on my therapist hat, right? And I would go to work, and then I would take my therapist hat off, and then I'd be at home. And it was almost like this different part of me. But now I feel like I can really be myself. Like I can blend my, my sensitivity and my compassion and my nerdiness all together into all areas. And so within ACT, this is called self as context, right? Rather than being fragmented self, we're ourselves, our full self in every context that we're in. And so I think it's allowed me to be more genuine, more authentic in every context, instead of like separating myself into different parts.
I've had that same type of feeling. For me, I use the self-discrepancy theory with E. Torrey Higgins, kind of the true self and ideal self.
Mhm.
And growing up and going through school, we had this mentality of, what does a psychologist look like? So for the guys, you had the shirt and the necktie and the suit jacket, and you had to wear like dress pants and shoes, and you had to present in a certain way, and that's how I had to do it for when I worked at the jail or worked at the hospital. But in private practice, I've started to integrate some of these elements of me more, and my thing is I always have like cool superhero socks.
Love it. What kind of superhero socks are you wearing today?
Today it's Deadpool.
Nice.
Yep, Deadpool.
Nice.
Nice.
And they're
I
these little conversation starters.
I so much relate to that, um, on a multitude of levels, because I think when I graduated and was kind of in my first role, I was suit, tie, like this avid, or like poster board, like professional. And you also start to look around and see like the people who are coming into your office, and they respond differently,
Yes.
right? I had a professor actually who tells an even greater story. He was working in, um it was a cancer center in New York, but it was sort of like the outpatient where there would be the therapeutic practice of it, right? Of just kind of working with that population. And he came in, suit, tie, nobody wanted to talk to him. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. And he kind of was working with his supervisor at the time, and supervisor said, well, because you look like a doctor, and they're done talking to doctors.
Yep.
And I 100% remember like going into, or as I got comfortable, I think with myself, like, no, we're just gonna go in like a button down and relaxed clothing a little bit. And oh, how things changed, right? And then as I started working in the hospital, obviously there was an attire that I had to follow, but it's also, I'm gonna decorate my office. I am going to put the Walking Dead comics that I have and want and decorate that.
Mhm.
And that was more of a conversation piece and a starter. And it had people just coming in feeling comfortable. Like, hey, I can talk to you because we like this. There's a common ground here. I'm not viewed anymore as, uh, you
The
know,
professional.
I'm not up here. Right. I'm not up here. I'm not a doctor. I'm not prescribing. I'm not, you're a person who I can talk to who's going to help me. And it's amazing how little trinkets that are still like behind me in a sense have been able to help with that. And I love it, and I love being able to incorporate that, and I love being able to tell other people to like bring the things in that you like, because you'd be surprised as to who walks through that door and they recognize that. So I love it. I really do.
And
It's
there's
actually one
the
of the fun parts I've had.
yeah, they are these intervention tools. Couple months ago, I bought a like papercraft light box on Etsy of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Took about a month to get in, and I've had it in my office for about a month. And the first weeks, never didn't really use it, but in the last like 2 weeks, I think I've used it like 5 times. Just bringing in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Aang and Zuko and Uncle Iroh into, all right, how do we integrate these characters into the things that you're going through? And it automatically clicked for them.
I love that.
So for you, what are some of the best moments you've experienced being a mental health professional?
Oh my goodness, there's so many, but just seeing somebody take on something impossible, something they're terrified of. Um, like I had this one client, let's call her Kelly. Um, Kelly had been severely bullied in elementary school, actually, initially by her teacher and then later by other students. And this understandably was very traumatic for her. She developed a lot of social anxiety. And by the time she got to high school, her anxiety was so bad that, forget doing school presentations, she had a hard time going to school at all. And so eventually her social anxiety morphed into agoraphobia, and she had a difficult time leaving the house. And so by the time her parents brought her to therapy, Kelly struggled just even getting to therapy. That was challenging. But one thing she really loved was Supernatural. And so we started talking about her favorite character was, and her favorite character is Dean Winchester. So if anyone listening is unfamiliar, Supernatural is about two brothers, Sam and Dean Winchester, whose mom was killed by a demon, and so they become essentially demon hunters, right? They fight anything supernatural that's evil, protecting humankind. And so Dean, the older brother, was Kelly's favorite because he was one that often had to look out for his brother, one that had to, quote unquote, stay strong, right? But like for him, it meant suppressing his emotions. And Kelly felt like it was her responsibility to look out for her family members, including her brother. And so she didn't come to other people with her emotions. So we started looking at skills as almost like learning to be a hunter. So I said, what do hunters need to do? Like if they're ever going into like a haunted house? And she said they need to bring salt. And I said, okay, so the way that we bring salt is that we practice a mindfulness technique, right? Like the ghost might be there, but we've got our salt, it's fine. And so we would practice mindfulness techniques with noticing anxiety in the body. And then we started doing exposures. So like we'd go to the mall, for example, and I do out of office exposures, and we would practice all kinds of things that would make her scared, like purposely practice facing monsters. Like she practiced eating by herself in the middle of a food court, and she wasn't allowed to look at her phone. And then we practice going into stores and asking silly questions, like asking if they have any paranormal activities and things like that. And so now Kelly is able to drive around. She's able to drive to the airport. She's able to drive to school. She's able to meet up with friends. And she still gets very anxious about social situations, but like a true hunter, she's not letting it hold her back. Right. And so it's moments like that that are so beautiful, that just bring you to tears. It's seeing somebody really become a true superhero in real life when when there's this willpower, even if they're still anxious about it.
Because a lot of people I found have this all or nothing mentality. It's either I have anxiety or don't.
Mhm.
And at some points, we will have some anxiety, and that's okay. It's even really good to have some anxiety. But as soon as they had like a little bit, they would walk away or turn away from things. And I
Mhm.
think just this helping profession, this hand that we can tend to them, give them some skills, and show them that they can do this. And their transformations are incredible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of it is about helping the person to see that they're more capable than they realize, right? That they're able to stay within the situation and that they have more skills than they previously thought.
That there is this power in a sense that is within them, that's
Yeah.
within somebody, to be able to manage, to be able to work with what has happened or what continues to happen, that there is this superpower in a sense. Is it laser beams or being able to kinetically charge any object, aka Gambit? No, unfortunately not. But because 9-year-old Matthew sure wishes it did.
For me, it was
But
transforming into Super Saiyan.
yeah. um but it's something different, and I'd even go as far as to say something a bit more powerful that can help to navigate the crazy world known as life right now. So I think it's much more powerful, and I think the extra added bonus, right, is being able to talk about and to process and to rationalize the things that, not rationalize, wrong word, but to be able to process
Yeah.
a lot of things that have happened and have it not invoke such a strong response,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's where the ACT aspect comes in, where it's we're accepting what happens, and that doesn't mean that we're glad it happened. That doesn't mean we're happy about it. But there's the skills that I have to cope and to accept and to continue to move forward, which I
Right.
think is something much more powerful than kinetically charging cards.
Well,
Sorry,
and
Gambit.
if you think about like Lord of the Rings, for example, right? Like Sam and Frodo were afraid, but the
Yeah,
journey wasn't about not being afraid. It was about
right.
doing it regardless of being afraid or not, right? And that
Hmm.
showed courage for both of them. And
Yeah.
so I think that, I think that life is about showing up regardless of how you feel. It's about going to the depth of Mordor if you have to, because it means that much, right? But I think it's about standing up for what you believe in, even if you're afraid. It's not about hiding until you feel better.
And within that, I've seen people just hide until or hope that they get better, but not recognize that just doing these small steps. So, Sam and Frodo in this journey, it's okay to be afraid while still being brave. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be brave and still be afraid.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So, having them have this understanding of, I can do this even though I'm scared out of my mind. It's okay. I can get through this.
Absolutely.
And this is where all these unhelpful thinking styles. I love the monsters analogy that you had used in the superhero training, and I use them daily. I have some plastered on my wall from one artist online, and having this interpretation, so distancing themselves from these unhelpful thoughts, is very powerful for them. So I'm not just fighting myself, I'm fighting this little monster that's telling me all these unhelpful things.
And over time, we can even learn to have compassion for those
Mhm.
monsters, right? Because really, those monsters are almost like our inner child that's crying out for attention, that's sometimes throwing a tantrum, right? That says, I'm not tired. I don't want to go to bed, right? But like, really, all they
Sounds like my
want
kids.
is, yep, yep. But really, all they want, right, is some affection and comfort.
I love that. And it's something that at a certain point not that it needs to happen, but that conversation within a therapeutic sense is so important to have and to talk about and to explore, because that's exactly what it is. I don't think there's no other better explanation than that right there as to what, sometimes these, having compassion for sometimes when the inner demons are a little strong, because just like the child who throws a tantrum, sometimes they get their way. And
Yeah,
so sometimes our demons will get their way, but that does not mean the end.
right. So can
That's
we
a
be
moment.
right? So can we be almost like a compassionate parent
Yeah,
to that inner child?
And
Yeah.
being that
absolutely.
compassionate parent takes a lot of self reflection and a lot of mindfulness and a lot of calming down.
And may the force be with you on that.
Mm. So I know we're getting up on our time because I know you kind of had that hard cutoff. One thing I wanted to touch on is not only are you a psychologist, but you're also a very established writer. So other than being a mental health professional, what are some of the things that you do and some of the interests that you have?
Thank you. So I am obviously obsessed with books. I have been since probably before I was born. My mom was finishing her master's degree when she was pregnant with me, so she used to read to me as I was in her belly, and so yeah, I really was like, reading before I was born in some ways. I joke that books have always been my friends, and so one of my biggest passions is reading and writing books. And so I'm writing a book on loneliness now because I believe that loneliness is a worldwide epidemic. That is something that the U.S. Surgeon General has said that it's has been a mental health epidemic. And I'm also working on writing a book on sharing my grandma's story of surviving the Holocaust and having been enslaved in Nazi Germany during World War II. And so it's my way of sharing stories, in the loneliness book to let people know, A, that you're not alone, and sharing other people's stories of loneliness. And in sharing my grandma's story, I started writing it before the war, but now it's even more so to let people know what history was like, how history can repeat itself, and how far it can go.
So is the loneliness book one that you're working on now, or is it the one that is about to be released?
It's one
It
I'm
shouldn't be
working
this
on
way,
now.
I think it's called.
It Shouldn't Be This Way is out already in the UK and is coming out in the US and Canada in June.
I'm waiting for
Um,
my copy to arrive.
Yay. And I'm also narrating the audiobook for that one. So It Shouldn't Be This Way is essentially an acceptance book. So
Okay.
it's about how do we sit with things that shouldn't be this way? How do we process grief and trauma, like about the war, about the pandemic, about the assault, about betrayal, about death of a loved one or our mortality? How do we process some of the painful emotions that we're feeling that we previously might have been told we're not allowed to feel? And so this book is about self-liberation. It's about standing up to ableist oppression, in terms of people telling people, oh, just don't feel this way. Don't look at it this way. And it's essentially an act of rebellion. It's taking your emotions back and saying, no, these are my emotions and I'm allowed to feel. And if I want to feel angry, if I want to feel sad, this is how I'm going to feel. So that's the purpose of this book. It's about self-empowerment through authenticity and connection with your emotions.
I can't wait to read it. And I'm already thinking of clients that I would suggest. I'm sure the book or chapters, because I'm big on homework and saying, well, this book talks exactly of what we're going to be talking about. So it kind of gives them a primer to springboard into.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And again, I know you were mentioning that you are working on these two books. Are there anything else that you're working on? I know that in September, the second superhero therapy conference is coming along. I know I have to submit my proposal for something.
That would be wonderful. Yes, I'm very excited about it. So it will be the second annual Superhero Therapy Conference. It is primarily targeted toward mental health professionals, but it is open to everyone to attend. And we are accepting panel submissions now. And the hope is to promote knowledge about providing this kind of therapy through storytelling all over the world. We have amazing keynote speakers. We have two keynote speakers who are not therapists also. So we have the amazing Chase Masterson from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Lita,
Ooh.
who will be talking about storytelling as finding post traumatic growth. And we have Greg Weisman, the creator of Gargoyles and co creator of HBO's Young Justice.
Oh,
Ta-
Gargoyles takes me back to my childhood.
I know. He will be talking about the power of storytelling and also writing about trauma, in terms of creating characters that viewers and readers can relate to. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, I can't wait because I know last year I couldn't attend live because work. And I already booked a bunch of time off just to do like my licensing exam. So I had to kind of recoup some costs. But this year, I'm sure I'm booking those days off and going to be attending those panels because last year, um, I know I attended Andrea's panel live and it was so good.
Thank you. Yeah, she was amazing. I'm
Mm.
so glad that she opened the conference. She did incredible. This year, we're also very fortunate to have the amazing Kelly Wilson. He is the co creator of ACT, and he uses stories in his therapy. So he's one of the three co creators of ACT, along with Steve Hayes and Kirk Strassel. So, I joke that like I dare you not to cry when Kelly talks, because it's impossible. And he's just one of the most amazing, beautiful humans ever in terms of he's so genuine and authentic, and he speaks from the heart. And so I'm really, really excited that he's going to be one of our keynotes this year.
Awesome.
So before we end today's show, one, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was an incredible conversation,
Thank you for
and
having me.
your story is, again, like we said, one that we've heard so much, but it's such an inspiring one that I feel that so many people need to hear it. So if people want to know more or follow you more of what you do, where could they go?
Thank you. So my website is superhero-therapy.com. I'm on all social media. If you look for Janina Scarlett, you should be able to find me.
Well, thank you so much. Matt, I know you are the master of plugs, so you can take us away.
Am comfortable with selling my soul out. That is fine. um, I want to quickly add, Dr. Scarlett, this is the second time that I've had the pleasure of meeting and talking with you, and just as the last time, there is this air of just a love of what you do, and it's infectious, right? Because as I talk to you and as I listen, I I want to do more, and I want to do everything, and I want to be part of that and constantly do it. And I say this because then I brought up your name countlessly to other professionals that I work with to look at, to assist with some of the clients that they're working with. So just thank you for being you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. That's very kind. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was our pleasure.
So very quickly with our plugs, thank you for listening to Healer's Journey, episode 3 today. Feel free to leave us a review on iTunes, Podbean, wherever you find your podcasts. It helps to spread this podcast, our typical Guardians mental health podcast, just to everybody who may not have heard of us, and we want everyone to hear of us.
Mm-hmm.
Keep up to date with everything we are doing over at guardiansmh.org, and specifically follow us on Twitter at guardiansmh. That way you can be notified when we're going live, and especially when the podcast comes out. Also, feel free to join our partner Discord server, discord.gg/guardiansmh, where you can be a part of a continued conversation and just be a part of a really cool community. Help us keep the lights on here, or the Discord server active and the Twitch running. More so, keep helping us to fulfill the mental health kits that we are passionately pushing through. You can help support us at tiltify.com/@guardiansmentalhealth. Um, and that is really it, because we're working on a new merch store and I don't have the link for it yet, but keep an eye out for that. So thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Yes. Take care.
Bye-bye.